Hello all! Welcome to this tutorial on how to pause your game in Unity Game Engine the easy way. The most convenient method for pausing the game in Unity is by setting the game's time scale to 0, which effectively pauses all time-based operations including movement, physics, and animation. Setting the time scale to 1 again will return the game to its normal speed. To pause a game in Unity, simply set the time scale to 0 to pause it and back to 1. Which by the way is default, to unpause it again. In scripting it looks like this. Setting the time scale affects the time and delta time measuring variables in the time class. Put simply, changing the time scale from its default of 1 will speed up or slow the game down. For example, you can run the game at half speed with a time scale of 0.5, or twice as fast with a time scale of 2. Setting it to 0 pauses the game entirely. However, not everything is affected. Understanding what actually happens when the game is paused using this method will help you to avoid unexpected behavior later on. Stopping the game using timescale will, effectively, pause every object that is time-based. This typically accounts for everything that is happening in the game, as movement is usually scaled by delta time. Animation, also, is time-based and physics steps will not be called when time scale is 0. But not everything is stopped, and understanding what's happening behind the scenes can help to make building a pause system a little bit easier. It may surprise you to know that update will continue to be called when the game's timescale is at 0. This means that anything inside of an update loop, including in coroutines, will continue to run regardless of the timescale, which can potentially cause an issue when detecting input. However, anything that relies on time-based measurement will be stopped, such as animations, time-based delays such as invoke and wait for seconds, and all movement, so long as it's being multiplied by time.delta-time. In practice, this means that, in most cases, everything will be stopped when the game is paused and, even though update is still being called, nothing is actually happening. When the time scale is set to 0, fixed update will not be called at all. This is useful as it essentially freezes all physics-based movement automatically whenever the game is paused using the time scale method. When the time scale is set to 0, time.time, which is the time in seconds since the game started, will be stopped. In most cases, this is a good thing, as any in-game measurement that relies on the time.time value will also be paused with it. But what if you still need to measure time when the game is paused? Luckily, there are a couple of options for doing just that. Time.realTime since startup and Time.Unscaled time are not affected by timescale and will continue to measure time even when the game is paused. When the timescale is set to 0, all movement will be stopped, but only if that movement is being calculated in units per second using time.delta-time. What does that mean? In Unity it's good practice to multiply movement calculations by time.delta-time, which is the amount of time since the last frame. Like this. This converts the rate of movement from units per frame to units per second. The purpose being to maintain consistent, smooth movement even when the frame rate changes. But there's another reason to use time.delta-time when moving objects. When pausing the game using the time scale method, instead of the time since the last frame, time.delta-time will be 0. This means that any movement that is being multiplied by time.delta-time will be multiplied by 0. Which means no movement at all. Usually, this is the desired behavior when the game is paused. If, however, you were to move an object using a fixed multiplier, like this. In this example, the object would continue to move, even when the game is paused. But what if you actually do want this behavior? For example, what if you want to pause the entire game, except for some objects? What's the right way to do that? When pausing the game, you may want some objects to continue to move without being affected by the change in time scale. Luckily, it's possible to prevent objects from being paused by using unscaled time in place of regular time variables. For example, to use unscaled time. Instead of time.delta-time, use time.unscale delta-time. Instead of time.fixed DeltaTime, use time.fixed Unscaled DeltaTime. Instead of time.time, use time.unscaled time. Most variables in the time class include an unscaled option that, when used, will ignore changes to the timescale, which is ideal for excluding certain objects from being paused, or from other timescale changes as well. When building a pause menu, it's likely that your menu screen, buttons, and controls will all use animation. There's just one problem. Animation is time-based, and when pausing the game using the timescale method, any menu animations will be paused too. Luckily, there's an easy solution by changing the update mode of the Animator component to use Unscaled Time. The Unscaled Time update mode ignores timescale changes and is ideal for animating pause menus and other GUIs. While movement will be stopped when the game is paused, update will continue to be called. This can cause control input conditions, which are often placed inside the update loop, to still be checked, even when the game is stopped. In some cases, this isn't a problem. Either because the movement can't occur or, in the case of physics-based movement, won't be called at all, as fixed update is not called when timescale is at 0. However, allowing gameplay input while the game is paused can cause you problems. For example, in a top-down 2D game, it might be that player controls may still change the character sprite to face a different direction, even though the character isn't moving. Actions and other controls may also still fire, but may not work correctly or at all, only to then trigger when the game is unpaused again. The controls that move the player may also be required to navigate the pause menu. In any case, for these reasons and more, it's good practice to prevent gameplay input while the game is paused. So what's the best way to do it? The simplest method is to first keep track of whether the game is paused or not with a public static Boolean variable, like this. Code senses that when escape key is pressed as in input.getKeyDown, then invert the Boolean variable game is paused to keep track of state whether the game is paused or not. The function pauseGame is called for every escape key press. Then in pauseGame it is checked if the game is paused, depending on which time.timescale is set to pause or unpause the game. Making the variable static means that it is not specific to a single instance, the value is always the same, even if there are multiple instances, and that any class can access it. Next, place all of the game's input checks inside if conditions, so that they can only occur if the game is not paused, like this. If the game is not paused, then if space key is pressed, then make the player jump. However, if the game is paused and space key is pressed, then the player can't jump. Alternatively, you may want to use a more general condition, similar to the above, but that controls all of the gameplay input, turning it on or off. This would allow you to disable input when the game is paused and also for other purposes as well, such as cutscenes. Adding this simple condition early on in development will make it easier to prevent unexpected behavior later. If you've tried using timescale to pause the game, you may have noticed that audio continues to play even when the game is paused. So how do you stop all of the game's audio when the game is paused? Helpfully, there's a very easy method for doing exactly that. Pausing the audio listener will pause all audio in the game. Simply set AudioListener.pause to true when pausing the game, like this. Audio that is paused using this method will resume from where it left off when the audio listener is unpaused again. But what about menu sounds and music? What if you want to stop some sounds, but keep others playing? Helpfully, you can instruct audio sources to ignore the audio listener pause state, like this. This will allow special audio sources, such as for your menu and UI sounds, to continue to play, even though other sounds have been stopped. Subscribe, like, comment and share my channel for more fun videos, and stay tuned for more. Thanks for watching.